Namaste. Welcome to episode 5 of our Let's Talk Battery series, where we've been talking to experts, practitioners, and different stakeholders of the energy sector in Nepal. And they've been sharing insights on how storage could address some of the pressing energy needs of the country. And to discuss today, we have with us Dr. Sandip Shah with us to share his insights on batteries, hydropower, solar, distributed generation, and all of that. So let's start. Welcome, Sandip sir.
Thank you very much.
I know you need no introduction, but I mean, before we start, could you maybe tell our new audiences a little bit about yourself and not all, but maybe just highlights of your accomplishments in the last, throughout your career.
Okay, thanks. I've been in the energy industry for the last 3 decades. In Nepal and also globally, I've worked a lot. I have a PhD in hydropower engineering, and that immediately after my engineering, I came to Nepal and started as a consultant, purely technical, doing dams and tunnels and underground powerhouses and all of that. But gradually, I moved on to management of construction projects, operating assets, and new project identification, business development, and all of that. I was in fact leading the entire process for Europe's largest renewable energy company, Statkraft, in Nepal, and also looking after all of their construction projects globally. So that way I was able to contribute a lot to this industry. Out of my 3 decades of work, the first 27 years were purely on hydro. But for the last 3 years now, I've been focusing a bit more on other forms of renewable energy generation, solar, batteries, and other possibilities. In fact, I moved on also to see what would be the best options for making power available at affordable and reliable, affordable rates with a lot of reliability to the consumers through power trade as well.
Sure.
Within Nepal and outside of Nepal.
But Nepal is endowed with so much hydro potential, right? We always talk about hydro. But why this shift now? What changes? What prompted this change to move on to other sources of energy?
Yeah, right. It's right. We have heard a lot about the hydro potential in Nepal and all of that. I will not go into those numbers because I don't think we will be able to achieve those numbers. But yes, we are developing a lot of hydros in Nepal, but perhaps not the right type of hydros. We have these what we call the run-of-river schemes, where you simply divert the water from the river to the power plant, and then you have your daily peaking ponds, and then you have your storage hydros. We are doing a lot more of the simple run-of-river hydros, which are adding a lot of capacity to the system, but not at the time when it is really required. They're adding capacity during the wet season, during the monsoon, when we don't have so much demand within Nepal. And then in the dry season, they are at least less than 25% of their installed capacity. But the demand is the maximum at that time. So we are having this imbalance of supply and demand. And we still are going to add another 3,000 megawatts in the next 3 years in Nepal. So that's not going to really help the system. It will in fact make it more unbalanced. We need more of these peaking, daily peaking type of power plants or storage hydros. They all have their own complications, from environmental and social issues to sustainability issues. What I have noticed over the last 2 decades now is the issue about climate change impacts on hydros. We had done a study on one of our power plants in Nepal, where we looked at the impact of every degree rise of temperature on the flow available for generation.
Yeah.
And this was a plant which was snow-fed, and during the various simulations, what we found was there would be increased supply of water for the next 20 years. Yeah. But after that, there would be a gradual decrease.
Yeah.
Because the glaciers or the ice pack or the snow pack, whatever you call it, they are going to deplete.
Yeah.
As the temperature rises, they will be depleting faster.
Yeah.
So for the first next 20 years, probably we'll have a lot of water. That will increase our generation, increase our revenues, but we will start losing that after a while. So that's one aspect. The other thing what we realized was the total precipitation we are going to get, whether it's in the form of rainfall or snowfall, for the year is going to be the same for the next 20 years. But the distribution of precipitation is going to change. We will have longer, drier winters, and we will have shorter and these wet seasons with high intensity rainfalls. So if you're not going to store that water, that's just going to go down the river. Besides that, these high intensity rainfalls will cause flash floods, cause damage to the project areas, and of course the communities living in that area. So we need to find alternative ways of generating electricity. Just talking about that. Sustainability of the hydros is one question. The other question is, if we are going to have climate change impacts on the hydro projects, we need to have another source of energy. And for Nepal, we have looked at solar, we have looked at wind. Perhaps solar is the other solution that we have to look for. There's a lot of discussion about why solar in Nepal we have this large potential. And my submission to all of the people who are questioning this is that solar is not trying to compete with hydro in Nepal. Of course, hydro is going to be the main generation for decades to come now. But solar is very complementary because the run-of-river hydros that we are building are going to have low generation during the dry season, and that's the time when we have maximum generation from our solar plants. There will be less clouds in the sky. And yes, during the wet season, there will be clouds in the sky, so the solar plants will decrease. Their production decreases. And the hydros pick up at that. So there's complementarity.
So two things that you mentioned, right? I mean, the variability of hydro, I think that is a big concern, and usually the conversation usually revolves around supply and demand, and that changes all the time, and how do we manage this production and demand, which are obviously moving all the time, is a big challenge, right? And on top of that, there's climate change issue to address. Like, how do we secure our energy supply for not just the next 20 years, but even longer than that, right? So there's two ways to, just rephrase what you said, but even the renewable energy solutions, like say solar, have their own issues, right? I mean, just in terms of variability. And we obviously talked about the complementary nature, but I mean, how else could we integrate these, what would be the right way to integrate these solar projects into the grid so that we take maximum advantage of the complementary nature and also future-proof our grid for a long period of time?
Sure. I think what I've seen in this integrated Nepal grid that we have is that most of the hydro projects are concentrated on the central and eastern part of Nepal. The western part of Nepal still does not have major power inputs. So the demand is increasing in those areas as well. There are a lot of industries coming up, cement plants, steel rolling mills, private factories and all of that, which are quite energy intensive. And the availability of power is a big question mark there. Power is coming from, let's say, the central part of Nepal, the wheeling, the transmission losses, and also we see that at times, we don't have power because it's not there in the grid. So if we can have solar power plants in those areas where the grid does not have a lot of injection from hydro projects, that will provide at least the daytime load support, and we can have a good quality of supply for these industries. Besides that, at the moment, these industries are running their diesel gensets, very, very expensive. If we can put some batteries in there, that will greatly enhance the availability of power during even the evening peak hours, and also for their generation. My view is that if we can integrate this type of a system with the national grid, and the grid acts as the backup power for the industries, that should take us a long way into utilizing the benefits of both types of systems. Yes, the solar power plants have their own issues. If there's clouds in the sky, the generation will fall, and some other power plant in the system has to pick up that load because the load will still be there. Now that introduces transients in the system.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to get into the technicalities, but the grid becomes unstable. Some other power plant has to pick up that load. For our system, that some other power plant has to be a hydro plant, which probably is running at part load and has to pick up that load in a very short period of time. We have these electronic governors with these power plants. Some of the power plants in the system have that possibility to pick up that load at very short notice. What I have seen is 3 to 4 minutes is what is required for the power plants to ramp up their production and stabilize the grid. Now, look at it in another way. If we have batteries in the system, those batteries can pick up those unstable zones, unstable times within seconds. So we are not going to wait for 3-4 minutes for the grid to stabilize. We could be in seconds. Now, for that we need large capacity grid scale batteries. Deputed at certain locations, close to probably the load centers, the substations. That's something we need to plan for. As we see more of this variable renewable energy sources coming into the system, we will have to have this support in the grid at critical locations.
Yeah, I think like that's, just sounds, just from technical standpoint, that just sounds like a big relief to not very well managed grid. And if there's like a lot of imbalances in the grid, that sounds like a great solution, right? So start from a consumer level, right? I think what advantages would a consumer have? Because we talked about industries earlier, and that the fact that they can just obviously get access to a much reliable power by having access to batteries and say even solar, right? And a lot of them are energy generators anyway, because a lot of them have diesel generators in-house, right? So for these consumers, even if they do not want to have if they do not have a proper understanding of the entire grid, why should like consumers, say like an industry, care about where they get their energy source from, or having batteries installed at their location? Is that something that the industry should it should matter to them?
Yeah, actually right now we have this vertically integrated utility, our national utility, which does generation, transmission, distribution, everything. They have their own issues. They probably need to graduate to a much higher level now. But the way the technology is developing now, we could have generation at several locations. We could have this distributed generation available at various locations. If they can supply the power from these distributed generation locations to consumers anywhere else, using the grid as the wheeling or the highway, electrons highway, I think that would bring more reliability into the system. Probably it would be more competitive also, and that would definitely benefit the consumer. Now, how that is to be done is something that needs to be really thought about at the policy level, and also then the necessary regulations have to come in.
Let me ask you this. Obviously we know that there are advantages to having grid scale batteries, connected to the distribution grid or even large scale projects, right? Do you see these projects come up in the future?
Yeah, I certainly think they will come up, because as we see that there's more hydro production being introduced into the system, the demand supply situation is changing. We are getting more again seasonal type of supplies and seasonal type of demands, we may not have the power available at the time that we really need it. So the consumer will start looking at options. And the way the technology is improving nowadays, I think that option will be coming in sooner rather than later. We will need to have this distributed generation option available. In one of the European companies that I was working on, they had 10,000 megawatts of distributed solar generation rooftop in Germany, which was being managed by traders. And they were basically doing the matchmaking between this available supply and the industries which were really requiring that power. Of course, the transmission link had to be available. So It was just a matter of availability of power and the requirement of power. On one side, the price was definitely a governing factor there, and the availability of this capacity on this transmission line. But that is what the power trading is all about. If you have a distributed system and you can manage it somehow through technology and make it available to the people in a distributed manner, I think that would be the ultimate that we are looking at. We don't need to rely on one utility to do all the services. We can have several types of these distributed facilities available. Definitely going to benefit the customer, definitely going to benefit the one who has put that solar plant on his rooftop.
And definitely, like as we move towards that step, right? I mean, and especially as we've been a pioneer of hydropower project development, especially from the independent power producer side. Just for, and I'm pretty sure that must have been quite a task to set that up, right? So for people trying to set up even distributed generation, or even like say a standalone battery storage kind of projects, right? I mean, what kind of challenges do you foresee in working with the utility, the regulators? What are the barriers to adoption do you see there?
See, I think the utility still does not have that type of exposure to these type of technologies. They still feel that they are the ones who are going to supply the power to each and every customer in the country. Now they need to get away from that mindset. If power is available, from my rooftop, if I have a connectivity to the grid, and I can, sell that power to either to the grid or to some other customer, I should be allowed to do it. If you go to the Western countries, they have that thing. They utilize the sun during the daytime to, do their regular work. Operating their washing machines or refrigerators or cook stoves and all that. And whatever is excess, they sell to the grid. And in the evening, if they need more power from the grid, they are always taking it from there. So that net metering concept is working very well. Taking it to another level, finding a buyer for your excess power, that will be the ultimate, I think. And that's probably something that we will have to look at, technology which is available for distributed generation management. You need blockchains, whatever. We need to get there. I already feel that there is a resistance from the utility for that. Because what they are saying is, if we are going to have all of this distributed generation at different locations in the grid, it might, their distribution system is not geared up to take up this type of intermittent generation feeding into the system. Besides that, these distributed generation facilities are taking away their revenues. So we have already started seeing that. If you look at the net metering contract that they have right now, it's only for 2 years. So you're not going to install your solar system just for 2 years. It has to be 15, 20 years. So that resistance, the mindset change has to happen, and then the ensuing the technology has to be there. Good internet connectivity, and we should be able to have the regulations in place which will allow us to do it.
I mean, it's even I have witnessed that the utility sometimes views these projects as competition, right? I mean, it obviously is taking away their revenue in the short term, but in the long term, there surely is like a lot of value to be derived through these projects, even for the utility, right?
Yeah, definitely. Utility can really benefit from these type of technologies. I think, it's a mindset change that has to happen. And as we see that, more of this distributed generation type of arrangements are coming up, they will have to move on. They will have to try to fit into the system rather than trying to resist it. That technology resistance has to go away. We have seen that even in the grid-connected solar generation. They came up with some very, very interesting requirements, which we said, yes, we can manage that. And they have tried to adjust to that. So for example, reactive power during the night time. So where do you get that? There's no sun in the night. So all of those arrangements are there. I think it's just moving away from just that pure hydro-focused mindset. Move on to other technologies. They need to be open to discuss these other technologies. Distributed generation is something that I'm very passionate about. Perhaps we can look at that aspect as well. But batteries are going to be a critical part of this.
Yeah, and also like while we talk about batteries and like the value that they can derive for utility, I mean obviously like try and get NEA to understand their price tag. Okay, like, what's the cost of energy, like for them, because right now there's no accountability with NEA with regards to like the reliability of energy that they supply, right? I mean, they charge tariff to customers for the usage of electricity, but if there's an outage, there's no penalty.
No penalty.
Right. So there's that sort of like deters them from taking steps towards reliability, and are we being too focused on supply and demand and not reliability in general?
I would add one more aspect to that: quality, reliability, and quality. You're right. They are not really focusing on that right now, and I think with the regulator there in place, the electricity regulator there in place now, perhaps they will be asked to improve on this whole issue about reliability and quality as well, and then they will have to find solutions. And definitely, the grid scale batteries are going to be one of the solutions they will have to look for. Perhaps have more storage through batteries or through storage hydros also.
Yeah. So that's one area where I feel like NE has shown an interest towards storage, right? Not distributed storage connected all over the grid, but just at the generation side, right? Because there's been talk about like pumped hydro. There's this Budi Gandaki large one that's being planned.
Yes.
I mean, while these and that sort of like just begs the question that NE does understand storage and the importance of storage. How could batteries supplement some of the existing hydro projects and then also like maybe the storage projects that NEA actually wants to develop in the future?
Storage projects are definitely required in the system. The large storage hydros that NEA is planning, technically definitely required. But all the environmental and social concerns that they come up with have to be properly managed. All of these issues regarding peoples and relocation, restoration, and all of that has to be looked at. Biodiversity has to be looked at. We see a lot of issues with indigenous peoples in Nepal, which will have to be properly addressed before these large hydros will come in. They will definitely provide a big boost to the system that we have. But in the meantime, I think the batteries will play a key role in providing this, or sort of mimicking what the storage hydros will do at different locations in the grid. Whether it is close to the existing power plants, or I would prefer close to the load centers because of the line losses. The DC line losses are going to be there. If let's say if they can put up a series of batteries around Kathmandu Valley or any of the other load centers like Biratnagar or Pokhara or Bhairava, Nepalganj, that would really help the system in terms of availability of power, in terms of quality of power, in terms of reliability of power. And yes, it will come at a cost, but if you look at the cost comparison for the electricity generated from a storage hydro during peak hours in the winter, compare it with what a storage battery will generate, I think it's quite comparable. We have done some analysis in the past. The returns are not fantastic, but if they are if there is a proper funding mechanism available for these batteries, they can be viable. And I would suggest that a large number of smaller capacity batteries, maybe perhaps half a megawatt, 1 megawatt type of batteries, be installed at several locations along the main grid, rather than having a large battery capacity in one location. It will improve the efficiencies and the quality of it.
Let me ask you this, right? So we talked about some of the challenges in building up these projects, but also like a lot of opportunities. It solves a lot of the problems that we are currently facing as a nation. And for some of these distributed projects, and not just distributed, but large scale, grid connected, and other forms of energy generation management to come into picture besides hydropower. what kind of changes would NE have to make, or like what are the steps that a utility might have to take to be more welcoming to other forms of technology?
Right. I think the first thing that they need to do is to have a realization that hydro is not going to be the only solution for Nepal. They have to look at other energy sources. As I mentioned earlier, also climate change and all of those issues are there. The gestation period for hydros, the higher risks, and then when you get into the storage hydros, this whole issue about the environment and the social governance issues are there. They need to look at other alternatives, and distributed generation is definitely going to be a part of it. I would say they need to be having an open mindset about thinking about other technologies, looking at the possibility of integrating these technologies into the system. Now, integration is one thing that they will have to focus on. One issue is the technology part, the equipment that will have to come with that, and then the regulations of it. Now, we have a regulator, and perhaps they also need to be educated on these other forms of renewable energy generation besides hydro, and how they need to be integrated in the system, what sort of pricing mechanisms have to be there, what sort of wheeling mechanisms have to be there, and also the accounting process for all of this distributed generation has to be properly regulated. It's happening elsewhere. They need to open their minds and look at what else is happening. Don't lock yourselves into just hydros. Because the hydros have their own issues. Perhaps there are simpler solutions which have a shorter gestation period, lower risk, and equally on the pricing side, perhaps similar. Market is maturing on these other technologies also. There in Nepal, we don't see the solar market as yet fully matured compared to the hydros. And that's why the processes which have been incorporated right now in the system about reverse auctions and all that, they don't make sense at the moment for solar.
Yeah.
The market is, the industry is not mature enough yet. Also, what the regulator needs to look at is, rather than just comparing what is happening elsewhere in the world on the pricing side, they need to see what has been the provisions leading up to these type of pricing. The whole solar park policies, and the subsidies on the borrowings, the lendings, all of that has to be fully accounted for before setting up any reverse auction prices. So my suggestion, my advice to not only the utility but also to the regulator is keep your minds open, carefully think through and what has happened elsewhere. Try to incorporate those things in Nepal and be open to different types of energy sources.
Yeah. And also be open to change. Change is neither good nor bad. Change is change, and just be open to all the developments that's happening elsewhere around the world.
Yeah, they definitely need to be open to change.
Yeah.
As they say, you have to sniff.
Yeah.
Change, right.
Yeah.
Whereas, who moved my cheese?
Who moved my cheese?
If the cheese moves, then we'll be in difficulty. If the water is not there in the rivers, we'll be in difficulty. I don't think it's going to happen, but at least the sun is going to be there all the time.
All the time, yeah.
So I think that's why we need to have a combination of whatever energy sources that we have. Look at technology. Technology is rapidly increasing.
Yeah.
Solar, wind, batteries, accounting technologies for ledger management, blockchains and all. Use all of that. It's available.
Absolutely. And on that note, we're going to end today. And thank you so much, Sandip sir, for sharing your insights. It's been very insightful for me, and we look forward to having more conversations such as these in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.